thank you. Thank you for the honour you've done to me this afternoon. Thank you for inviting me here, for making my stay so welcome, for providing the sunshine. We don't get much of that in the UK. And thank you to my friends here, to George and Michalis and Johannes and all of my new friends, for helping move web science along on the international stage, and in particular the work you're doing here in Veria. Teaching in Veria is a phrase I've heard a lot tonight. This is clearly a great honour for people to teach in Veria on this degree. And I'm excited to be going there tomorrow to meet the Mayor of Veria and also to meet the students that are being taught on the Master's course. So I've been invited to talk to you a little bit. Well, actually they said 3 hours. I'm joking. I have to sing for my supper, as we say in the UK, and tell you a little bit about why web science and why we think it's important. If you need to move to see the slides, do feel free. Some of them are important that you see while I talk. I think George actually said a lot when you were translating for me. I think George told you the story of the web and web science, so maybe I don't have much to tell you, but I will tell you in my own words. Why a new science and why is it important? Well, I think George was saying about how the web started, and I usually start my talks by looking back at the past. Most people in this room will remember life before the web. There are some here, particularly the boy running around with the camera, and some of the students, who will not remember life before the web. Tim Berners-Lee wrote the specification for the web in 1989, which is only 21 years ago. And in fact, we first started to use it with the launch of the Mosaic browser in 92. I first met Tim in 1990, and I first saw him demonstrate the web in 1991. This is very, very recent in our history. It's most people probably have only used the web for the last 10 years. And if you try and remember when you first saw it, to some people, particularly academia, it may be that you have a very clear remembrance of that. But I would suspect to most people in the world, it crept up on them. People around them started mentioning it, they started reading about it in the press. Suddenly there'd be this thing with a H. Do you remember how on television people used to say www. And spell out the address as if it was something really unusual. And you'd start seeing these appearing, and you'd start looking at them, and when you got your computer at home, or of course for academics we'd be using in the laboratory, you started to explore. But now, we just don't think about it at all. We just take it totally for granted. We tend to talk about the elephant in the room. I'll come back to that later. This is an important graph, and I hope you can see some of it. This is a graph that one of my PhD students, a web science student, has drawn, and it's the best resource. He took it from information on the web. It's the best resource I have to show the story. And this here, as you can see, is the flat line at the beginning. This is 91, and it starts to take off on this scale around 97, 98. And the two things that are happening at that time is the emergence of Google and the emergence of broadband technology. This top curve here is the estimate of the number of users, and this is the estimate of the number of hosts. Remember, of course, that the web started as one website with one web page, maybe two, when Tim first started it, and then there was another, and then there was another. And when it gets over 100, we start losing count. In the early days, those of you remember, you couldn't find things on the web just by following the links. You could, in the very early days, we found things on the web because we knew where they were. We knew there were very few number of websites, and we knew where to look. When you get over a certain size, that didn't work, and search engines started to emerge based on very well-established information retrieval theory from computer science. But the search engines didn't work all that well, and they did things like publish lists of new websites. And we were talking about we need a telephone directory for the web. We couldn't think of any other way that we were going to find it find things as it grew. And of course, the emergence of Google from the two PhD students at Stanford with their mathematical algorithm for actually using the links as well as the text analysis of the text on the pages, which really provides a recommender system for web pages. Everyone said, lovely idea. They published their paper in 1997 in a web conference, and then they had to prove that it scaled. Everyone said it wouldn't scale, so they had to do the engineering to prove that it scaled. So that took them until we started using Google in around '98. And if you remember, suddenly there was a search engine without adverts. Then they had to find a way to monetize it. They had to find a business model. And they found one eventually. They stumbled on the idea of auctioning, selling words. Effectively, companies buy words. They bid by blind auction to be the top link on Google for that search term. And that has transformed the way we use the web. And the web and Google are totally synergistic. But just think about the difference. The web is made up, and Tim's great legacy to the world is that he made it free, and he made it open standards, and he made it universal, so that everybody, anybody who could access the internet could develop a website, put up a web page. The interesting thing about Google, of course, is that it's grown to be this huge monopoly, effectively, which is built totally on proprietary standards. Very interesting dichotomy, and you see that all over the web. But let's go back to what was happening. Here's my student drew on the .com bubble. He's drawn it as a bubble. Here's Amazon appearing in around '98, and people said, buying books online? What a mad idea. Why would we want to do that? Bookshops were always going to have bookshops. Then, of course, there were a few companies that made a lot of money very quickly, and investors started to get excited and thinking that this was something, they were all going to be Bill Gates. The money flooded in to the first .com companies, as they were called. And if you look at this curve, you can see why that bubble had to burst. Because nobody had computers in their homes, or not enough people had computers in their homes. If you think about the other revolution that's talked about in reference to the web, we compare the invention of the web to the invention of the printing press in the 15th century. And when the first pioneers of printed books were selling their books, they were selling into a market that didn't exist because most people couldn't read. We were doing the same in the 1990s by selling on the web because most people didn't have a computer. So there were no business models and no market. So it had to collapse. And I remember reading a well-known journalist in the London Times writing in 1999 or 2000 saying, well, that's the end of shopping online. We're never going to have shopping online. People don't like it. But see what's emerging, the broadband technology, and we had this feedback loop of people hearing about this thing called the web, and it actually gave them a reason to buy a computer for the home. Suddenly it was fast enough, the price of computers came down. It's all circles within circles. So the curve starts to take off. And you recognize this curve. If you're going to be a company on the web, you have to follow this curve. You have to get everybody using your software. Or you're generally not going to survive. If you're going to be one of the big companies, your takeoff curve has to go like this at some point. It's also interesting that we have one Google, one Amazon, one eBay. It's very interesting that this open standard gives rise to these great monopolistic companies. This is another dichotomy on the web generally. So we're moving here